Mr. Birdie and members of the board, we do have several items for board discussion this evening. Our first item is our book study, My Black Friend Says, Lessons in Equity, Inclusion, and Cultural Competency by Heather S. Fleming. And just to refresh everyone's memory, we are going to discuss pages 1 through 37 this evening, and some prompts that we've been using in the past that seem to work for us. I read, I noticed, or I wondered. And so we'll open it up to discussion for anyone that would like to share anything that stood out to them.
Yeah. Could I lead us out, maybe?
Go ahead, Mr. Bagley.
Thank you. I noticed, if that's the prompt I can start with, I found it very reassuring, and it created instant credibility in my mind that this author, Mrs. Fleming, referenced no less than 4 times in the 37 pages we were reading our last author, Mrs. Brown, and so I thought that was great. Certainly talking about vulnerability and shame and how those can shape this whole conversation around inclusion and acceptance. So that was very interesting and really piqued my interest as I started to read the book. And she talks so much about vulnerability and that being that first step and being open to even having the conversation. I'll start there. I'll let someone else speak. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yep, I'll weigh in. This is, okay. Yes, Mr. Bagley, I thought it was also interesting that she did tie in Brene Brown in our last book, and I thought that was very good because the way that she tied it in with the concept of shame and guilt, I thought it made sense for what she's doing with this book, for what the author is doing with this book. What I noticed is on page 6, there was a really important section, or a section that I thought was really important. She talks about bonding ties, bridging ties, linking ties, and then at the bottom of that page, she talks about something that I think is really, really important and just kind of critical. She says, the funny thing about relationships, though, is that proximity doesn't necessarily make one open to change. And actually, nothing changes if we do not engage in meaningful interactions with those we love. And I know it's a simple thing, it sounds simple, but I think it's important because the idea that we're in circles a little closer together, you know, we live in communities together, those are not necessarily things that really foster change in relationships. The idea that a meaningful relationship is developed through meaningful interactions, I think that's pretty important, and it's something that should, you know, always be at our forefront. Just bringing groups together, that may not necessarily be all that's necessary. It takes meaningful interactions, and sometimes you have to dig deeper to find a way to get that meaningful reaction or interaction accomplished. So just right off the top, in the early section of the book, I thought that was important.
Mr. Gundrum or Mr. Clark, does they add anything?
Yeah, I'll go next. It's just short, actually right under that, I had highlighted something myself where this requires vulnerability, and I think that's something that people in general, especially in today's world, are afraid of because of criticism or judgment or whatever that may be. But it does take that vulnerability to be open, and sometimes it takes the first step for you, me, to be that vulnerable person, to make that step forward. And the 3 ties, the bridging, that one stuck out to me. Actually, I highlighted that one in here as well. To connect people across demographics, cleavage, age, race, class, occupation, religion, and the like. And that's the hardest one to do, even though we may touch, so to speak, but it's the hardest one really to break through. So it takes intentionality, and I had that written down in my notes too, the intentionality to be part of the solution to bridge those ties.
Mr. Gundry?
I also noticed the part about the different types of ties, and I sort of reflected on some of the different ties in my life, and tried to sort of categorize them and reflect on that. I also found the feelings chart on page 16 to be very interesting, and how feelings can lead to either a benefit or an impairment. You can get either one out of your feelings, and I think that's very important for people to note, especially if you're someone who, when you have a feeling, you just tend to react a certain way to that feeling, and you can see like, hey, there's another side, there's another way to handle this feeling. As far as what I wondered, when I was reading through she gave several examples of like the "what did I do wrong" statements. And I was reading through those, and thankfully I can't recall an episode in my life where I used any of those statements. But I started kind of wondering, like, what else have I ever said that maybe I meant one way, but it just did not come across the way I hoped it would, or I may have not intentionally offended somebody. So I did wonder that. And as far as the book goes, I think, once I picked it up, I had a hard time putting it down. It's very thought-provoking and very interesting, and I'm looking forward to digging further into it.
Yeah. If I might build off of Mrs. Gundram's comments, page 17, she called it MILA, mind, identity, learn, lean and learn, and then act. And under that act category, it talked about rephrasing of a question. And really, with what you were talking about in terms of the, I'm sorry, what were they called? The what I do. Yeah, I think too often, if you're going to have this conversation, you can't phrase it in how you're feeling, right? If the whole point is to learn how the other person is feeling. And I think that's where you get in trouble with the what I do's, which are, they happen, right? They cliches, I guess you'd call them, but you hear them in conversation, and sometimes I think they come from people that are very well intentioned, but yet the better question would be, well, how do you perceive that, or how does that make you feel? And now you're having a conversation on the topic instead of just sharing where you're at.
That's a good point.
I'm sorry. Mr. Clark, you want to say something?
Yes, on page 18, that pro tip, I really highlighted that whole thing because I think that's a good tip. If you're not willing to be honest and place yourself in a position of vulnerability, which I mentioned, and really it's intentionality as well, the path is filled with moments of self-realization, vulnerability, discomfort, pain, and challenge. However, you can push through these feelings. The emotional, social, and ethical rewards is worth the struggle. I just think that says a lot right there. And then on top of how it was written in essay form and a workbook form, and then the resources that she provided, I think it's a great read. And like Mrs. Gundram said, it was kind of, once you got started, it was hard to put down and quit. So I think this was a good choice, and I like the resources that she has provided for us.
I agree.
Mr. Shorter?
Oh, go ahead.
That's all right.
Okay. I just wanted to point out, or what I noticed on page 22, it kind of referenced back to Brene Brown's section, even though it's not highlighted specifically here, but she's basically alluding to rumbling with vulnerability. In that second paragraph, she says, limiting discourse and encapsulating people in racially stress-free bubbles of privilege often creates a situation where people develop biased opinions and language that are damaging to others around them, even when they are not intended to be. Basically, that rumble with vulnerability places you in a situation where you're basically taking yourself out of your comfort zone, and you can learn so much more in that space of being uncomfortable. And I've been in that situation myself and trying to do, you know, work and equity work and things like that. It can be uncomfortable, but you get so much more out of it if you let yourself go to that uncomfortable place. Just grin and bear it, you know, and listen and take things in and make that rumble with vulnerability work for you. I thought that was an important part. I enjoyed the book very much, especially the examples in here. I can say, you know, being a person of color and being a woman of color, I have experienced some of these, specifically, especially the hair thing. So here's the tip. Here's the tip. Yes, don't touch the hair. I can tell you, depending on what's going on in our lives, we may go straight, we may go curly. I know it's interesting, it's fabulous, yes, I know. But just, you know, don't touch it without our permission. So, but questions, I have no problems with questions at all. In fact, you know, being in a field where I'm pretty much by myself, so, you know, a lot of times, I'm very willing to answer questions, and you'll find that other people are willing to answer questions. I will tell you about the process to the hills come home, but yes, don't touch that. That's not good. But I thought that the things that she pointed out were definitely some of those touchy things where it's probably happened, you know, in the life of most Black people. I don't think people intend to make others uncomfortable, but it is good to learn. It's good to rumble with vulnerability and just kind of, you know, go there and learn. So I thought her tips were really good. I thought the sequence, you know, of the book so far was good. It's just definitely an enjoyable book and experience.
Yeah, so I'm a self-confessed not an avid reader. I just haven't never developed the habit for reading a lot, but this is good. I mean, and when I do read, I do like to read self-help type books because I consider myself a lifelong learner. So this book like hit me right in the first page where it said, there's so much misinformation and misunderstanding of issues of race and diversity, and we continue to find ourselves in conversations arguing about semantics instead of solutions. And I thought, man, that is so right on. Like, that is so true. And people want to justify their opinion based on semantics instead of like, well, let's move forward and improve. And again, on page 14, after I'm running out of highlighter, because I'm highlighting so many things, it says another reason we have not been able to move forward is that most white people are so insulated against racism that many are unable to effectively deal with any race-based stress. And I believe that wholeheartedly. Growing up in a predominantly white neighborhood, going to private education at predominantly white schools, I didn't interact a lot with children of color. I had some adults of color that I interacted with, but not many students. And I think that once you get out of your comfort zone and you start experiencing what other people are experiencing with racism, it definitely helps you learn and appreciate what they're going through. So again, the whole paragraph there, I could read it all, but we all have read it. It was so spot on, and I think once people start identifying that there is racism out there, and that even though you're not experiencing it, doesn't mean it's not there. You know, so I think that was pretty impactful. So, I mean, I can go on about some other things. I heard what Mrs. Gundrum said about the statements, about what I do and what I don't do, and well, I will tell you that is that I know growing up I've said many of these things. I'm not a racist, but I've said that, What about black on black crime? I've said those things, in my younger years, in my teenage years. Like I see now as an adult, as I've matured, as I've seen the racial issues that are going on, those statements don't hold much water. And so I'm hoping that the rest of society can look at their vulnerability and the things that are they're not really affecting their life, but they're affecting other people's lives. And if they can understand those things, that maybe we can start addressing some of these issues.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I read that and I thought, oh, I hear that a lot today when I'm trying to have conversations on occasion.
You cringe when you hear it, right?
Yeah, just immediately, because I already know that this person is kind of coming to the table with a closed mind, and they're getting information out of a certain bubble, and they already know. So, like, you can't fill a cup that's already full. Right. And when you hear that, you can try to explain it, but generally it gets really difficult, especially when we're dealing with these social justice issues. You hear that a lot. I mean, it really comes up a lot, and it almost stops the conversation. And I kind of think that's one of those, push away, move against moves that's talked about in here. I think it's a mechanism for those who are not ready to really rumble with vulnerability and really look at things. So it's definitely unfortunate. But one of those things that was pointed out on page 14, I'm going to just read it just so that people can share with us. There's a sentence, and it says, "We've developed a toxic culture that views vulnerability and empathy as weaknesses, and machismo and gentility as the most desirable traits for men and women." And I think that kind of goes, with what you're saying. And that is really something that's hurting us. It's okay to be empathetic, even if you don't necessarily understand all the issues. It's okay to say that you don't understand all of it, but showing some empathy versus sympathy. We talked about empathy versus sympathy in the first book study, but it's just the idea that you're coming to the situation acknowledging that you may not fully understand everything, but you're willing to learn, and you have an open heart, open minds. And so that idea that our culture looks at empathy as a weakness, I think you see signs of that, and that's really that's not good. I think that the idea of a toxic culture that's being developed with that is kind of cancerous and needs to be cut out. But empathy is good. Empathy is good.
Mr. Smith, Mrs. Lane, anybody else would like to chime in?
Would you like to go first, or you want me to go first?
They've taken all my highlighted things. But no, I agree with the things you were saying, that the board, I agree with everything that's being said tonight. It's amazing, though, how many items you brought up the same thing that I have highlighted, so. But I am also enjoying the book, too.
So I have a lot of highlights, but I have 3 stars, and multiple board members have highlighted the first one on page 6, at the bottom, about vulnerability and Brene Brown, and so I won't go into great detail with that. I did like this sentence, nothing changes if we do not engage in meaningful interactions with those we love. And I think the 2 key words there are engage and meaningful, because it's very easy for people to sit around and have conversation. It's different when people choose to engage. When people choose to engage, those conversations become much more meaningful. And so that hit home for me. And then on the very next page, page 7, I just love this piece. And it's kind of lengthy. but it starts at the top. Talk about this work as the act of falling in love with your fellow man. Specifically, what would happen if we were to fall in love platonically with our neighbors who are different from us? I've thought about this ever since she said it. This is basically what inclusion is asking us to do. In asking a person to move from linking ties to bridging ties, I am asking you to love that person fiercely enough to see their humanity. I'm asking you to acknowledge the similarities and appreciate the differences. And then this is the big one for me. I'm asking you to accept their problems as your own and be willing to take the steps necessary to help them address those problems because you love them and want them to be successful. But that's a big step right there. If if someone accepts someone else's problems as their own, not just acknowledge, but it takes it on and then takes the steps necessary to make a difference. And then on the third star I had was on page 20. And this kind of goes with what I mentioned this evening prior to the beginning of our equity presentation. One of the strengths of our diversity is that we are exposed to a lot of different perspectives, and that's how we learn from one another. And then at the very end of that first paragraph, it says, ask clarifying questions so that they can better understand what happened and why it elicited the reactions of the other party. It's so important to ask questions. How many times, I know I'm guilty of it. How many times have I been in a situation where I wanted to ask a question about any topic, but I was scared to ask the question for some reason? But we have to be willing to ask the question, or it will not be a teachable moment for us. And then we'll miss out on the opportunity to learn from others. So those were the 3 stars that I had, and like everyone else, I've really enjoyed the book and look forward to proceeding on. Thank you.
Anybody else like to chime in?
I would like to say one thing. I like the quote on page 28, in the middle of the page. She wrote, "Sameness only allows for one type of voice in the room. Fairness and inclusion makes room for all." And I thought, well, how boring it would be in our classrooms if there was really only one voice in the room or one opinion in the room. What would our art be like if paintings were made up of one color? What would a football team look like if everybody played quarterback? What would, the fish in the oceans, there are so many. I love my dog, but I love that there's a variety of dogs. And it's just that sameness would be horrible. And so to me, the message was, why don't we appreciate differences as opposed to, and she wrote this as well, that we should appreciate differences as opposed to fearing differences. Diversity is something to be embraced and loved.
Mr. Begley, Mrs. Gunderman, anything else you'd like to add? Mr. Clark?
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Shorter?
Oh, I'm good, thank you.
Well, I look forward to our next discussion, and I believe, I wrote that down, our next one's on February the 4th, and it'll be through page 74.
Correct.
Okay, so just a reminder, many of you may already be at page 74, I'm not there quite yet, but Mr. Smith, thank you so much for this great book. It's, again, you've hit the mark on having a great book for the board to read and to discuss. And it fits right in with our discussion tonight about our equity leadership. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, and I'll give an assist to our team as, we kind of, at one point, I think there was a list of 10 and asked for their feedback, what they heard. I think we whittled it down to 3 and then ended up landing on this one, so thank you.
Great.
All right. Our next discussion item is Butler Tech Board of Education Representative, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Birdie.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. My term on the Butler Tech Board of Education ends on December 31st of this year. And so at our January meeting, or organizational meeting here at Fairfield, we would need to select someone to represent Fairfield on Butler Tech's Board of Education. I would like to continue to do that. I would like the board to consider sending me back to Butler Tech to represent Fairfield. There's many things that we're working on currently. We have a new building that we're adding to the Natural Science Center to replace the, for lack of a better term, they're trailers. We're renting portable classrooms at our Monroe campus, the Natural Science Center, and we're in the design phase of putting a new building in there, and I would like to see that come to fruition. We're looking to expand opportunities for programs at our Fairfield Township campus. Currently, we're looking at, is there places that we can move some things around to add space to attract more students. Currently, it looks like the board at Butler Tech will have a 30% turnover in 2021. There's currently, I think, 3 members of associate schools that will be setting new board members or new representatives. And I think that the Butler Tech board, the remaining people would like me to stay on and help get those new board members up to speed. Also, I'm really enjoying my legislative work. Developed some relationships with some of our representatives that represent Fairfield at the state level and also at the federal level, and developed some relationships, and we have some good back and forth with how we can improve school funding, how we can take off some of the regulations that school districts are under, try to do what's best for students. So for those reasons, I would like to stay on, and I'll open up the conversation to the board if you have any questions or recommendations. And then, of course, this is something that we will vote on in January. Questions or comments?
Comment. I concur, and I think you would make a great member coming back. I think you should do that. It sounds like you got a lot of roots there, and making the connections that you have, and some of the time you spent already there, and you know the ins and outs. I think it would be a good place for you to stay. So, give my support.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I would also like to say, I think that, when it comes to Butler Tech, you couldn't get a better representative over there. Both you and Mr. Dan previously.
Mr. Murray.
Mr. Murray, thank you, I'm getting old. You guys have both done a great job, and I would love for you to continue that. I think you have the technical piece of it, you've got the love for education, you've got the administrative side of it, and you have, that got the personality where you go in and you're able to talk with, a lot of these legislators, and you're able to get some things done. I think those are important assets, and I would definitely like to see you stay on with that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions, Mrs. Gundrum, Mr. Begley?
No, I'd be interested to see if Mrs. Gundrum feels any different, but certainly I think we're probably all in unanimous support of you continuing in this role. You obviously have great passion for for Butler Tech, and obviously the other board members on their board see you as a leader, as you've served on their president. I don't know if you'll be continuing in that role, but certainly you've represented their board well and made us proud. So I very much think you should continue in that role.
Yes, I also think that you've been a great asset to their board, as you've been a great asset to our board. You know, like everyone else said, I can tell you have a passion for it, and I totally support you being the representative again.
Well, thank you. I didn't really mean this for us to turn into a love fest, but
Virtual hugs.
I will, then I guess it would be okay for the board for me to tell the leadership at Butler Tech that I'll probably be coming back, so, okay. Well, I appreciate that very much, and I do, I am very passionate about education and, of course, career technical education, and I think that the board does look to Fairfield for leadership. So thank you very much. I'll let Mr. Graff know, and the rest of the board. Okay.
All right, thank you. All right, our next item for discussion, quantitative modeling and reasoning course pilot. Mrs. Aul.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Birding, members of the board, I want to share with you tonight our intent to participate in the Ohio Department of Education's Mathematics, Modeling, and Reasoning pilot. Fairfield will be submitting an application this month in hopes of being able to take part in year 2 of this new course pilot. ODE has worked with the Ohio Department of Higher Education to rethink mathematics courses, curricula, and their relationships with other disciplines. This quantitative reasoning course is the first course created from this collaborative, and we anticipate other courses to follow. This particular course is a year-long course designed to promote reasoning, problem-solving, and modeling through thematic units focused on mathematical practices using hands-on, student-centered pedagogy. The course can be taken in place of Algebra 2 or in addition to Algebra 2. Additionally, students who take this course would be well prepared to take CCP and/or AP courses in statistics, quantitative reasoning, or technical math. Ultimately, this course would be ideal for a student who needs a 3rd or 4th credit in mathematics that is not intending to pursue a career that requires calculus. So other districts currently participating in the Year 1 pilot include Lakota, Mason, Milford, CPS, Deer Park, and Kings. Fairfield is applying to participate in Year 2 of the pilot. So if selected, the course teachers will receive extensive professional development and support from ODE throughout our pilot year. And the math department has discussed this, and we have 2 teachers who are interested in teaching the course who understand that there will be professional development, that ODE people might come and visit their classrooms just to see how the course is being implemented. But that's one of the reasons that makes being a part of the pilot so attractive. It's that support that we'll receive from the Ohio Department of Education in implementing the course here. So there's no need for board action on this item, but I did want to share with you and, of course, the public our intent to participate in this opportunity. So thank you.
I'm very excited about this. I don't know if other board members want to chime in on this.
You know, I'm excited too. When we submitted, is there any reason we would not be accepted?
I
I didn't think so.
I don't think so. But, you know, you never know. I don't know if they have a flood of schools, if they will decide that they can't support that many.
Yeah.
There's really no indication that they won't select people, but, you know, I just don't want to be presumptive.
Sure. No, I think it's outstanding. Thank you.
You know, and as I emailed you, my daughter took this course at Cincinnati State, and she didn't want to take it, but I told her that she needed to get experience with actual mathematical modeling. And so I can say from my own experience, just from the standpoint of having a kid take the quantitative reasoning, I was impressed with the fact that they were actually doing a lot with Microsoft Excel. They were actually going in and coding in equations. I saw a lot of pre-statistics type work. I saw a lot of problem solving. And I think out of all the classes that both of my kids have taken as far as math, that was the first time I'd seen a serious concentration on problem solving, on word problems, and really getting into some of the bare bones mechanics of putting a problem together, modeling it up, not just the mechanics of working the problem, using substitution or elimination or whatever you have in Algebra 2 or Algebra 1, but actually moving to the point where you utilize those things that you've developed in Algebra 1 and 2 into actually modeling up the problem, getting the problem solved. I thought that was sort of filling in a niche in math that could be pretty useful. So I would even say for kids that are taking or planning on taking calculus, just based on what I saw at the course at Cincinnati State, that might be a good little place to kind of, get that class in after Algebra 2, then do pre-calculus and go on to do calculus if you can. But I thought that there was a lot of value-added material in it. I'm glad to see that we're doing it here. I think our kids could definitely benefit from it. That's a skill set that's going to come in handy in college, regardless of whether you're doing biological studies or business. Just having those programming skills and Excel, there's so much that you can do with Excel. And getting exposure to it early in high school and, your junior year, senior year, that's going to prepare you for college because you'll use it a lot. So, yeah, I'm pretty excited about it.
Any other comments from Mr. Bagley, Mrs. Gunner? Any comments? Great. Oh, thank you very much.
You're welcome, thank you.
Forward to it.
Our next item for discussion, board policies, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We have 5 policies we'd like to speak to you this evening about. The first policy is ACCA. It's a grievance procedure for students. This policy is no longer a policy that OSBA has in their policy manual. We do have all the language that's in this policy in one of our exhibits, Exhibit AC-E-1. Now, instead of just one grievance procedure for students, there are a variety. If it's a Title IX grievance, there's one grievance procedure. There are just a number of different ones already spelled out in our policies. So I would like to recommend that we repeal policy ACCA. The language is already in our policies. The second, any questions about that one? The second policy is policy BDC. It deals with executive sessions, and the language is being updated in response to a recent opinion by the Ohio Ethics Commission. The new language clarifies who an individual is. It talks about that an individual can be an employee, an official of the school district, or a student. And so it spells that out in more depth. It also better clarifies there's a prohibition in the policy about disclosure of confidential information that's discussed in executive session. And this just clarifies and makes it more specific. It involves previous board members as well as current board members, and also includes present and past employees as well. So it's just a safeguard they're putting into policy BDC. Any questions about that one? The next two, Nancy will share with you.
Thank you. Policy DH, bonded employees and officers, just a slight change there, and allowing for the common practice of position bonds for the treasurer only, and then using our district liability insurance policy to cover the remaining employees, and also non-employees that collect money for us, possibly like at athletic events would be a good example of that. So just a couple of changes there. On policy DM regarding deposit of public funds, again, that's a change in the title of the policy. Also, it better reflects Ohio Revised Code Section 9.38 regarding the safeguarding of money received by the district. It also gives us some details added to comply with the Government Finance Officers Association's best practice revenue control policy. And that concludes my two policies for tonight. Any questions?
Thank you.
And the final policy is policy EDE. This is a policy that we frequently update. It's our technology and communication services. And this time the change is pretty simple. It's meant just to strengthen the language. It says that we have the right during the course of the year to change this policy, but then we have to communicate it to everyone who has signed an agreement to live up to the policy for that year. We have to share with them the new information, and then once we share it, they are responsible for living up to it, even though they've already signed the agreement to live up to the technology and communications plan. And it also puts a little meat in there that if someone isn't willing to live up to the policy and they break it some way, that they could be subject to discipline, either a student or a staff member. Any questions about those changes?
Questions or comments from the board?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Appreciate you.
All right. Our next item for board discussion is Building Our Future 2.0, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Penny.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. This evening, I would like to discuss an opportunity to take another step forward in the Building Our Future program by reactivating our district on the Ohio Facility Construction Commission's list for funding. Our district is currently part of an OFCC program called the Classroom Facilities Assistance Program, which you probably heard before as CFAP. As a CFAP district, you don't have to complete all of your school facility projects at one time, and can choose to do them through segments, and that's what we've chosen to do in this district. This is the path like I was just saying, we are already on. We completed our first segment in 2017 with Central Elementary, Compass Elementary, and the freshman school. Once a district completes a segment, they still remain on the list, but are considered in progress, which we're just leaving in progress with financial closeout, or inactive until they close out all prior projects and express interest in becoming active again through an application process and a board resolution. Currently, there are 90 school districts on the active list within the CFAP segmented program. We've been told we may be several years out from receiving funding, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we want to be or want to have the opportunity to receive funding sooner. Ultimately, this has to do with OFCC budgeting, but also has to do with when a district's number is called or there's a request for them to move forward with final planning and receiving funding, they might default to not do so. And by doing that, they are then skipped on the list and they go down further. I believe something very similar happened with our district back in 2014 when we started planning back in 2011, and then when we got closer to the time period where we were going to start actually building initially, we were told something very similar. We were told that we were many, many years out, for instance, 7, 8, 9 years out. And that's similar to what we have been hearing as we work through this process with OFCC. With that being said, just like in the past, things have moved quicker, they can move quicker again. And then we'd have the opportunity to also engage with the state, and if we chose to do so, look at doing a second segment of building within Fairfield City Schools. So if at the conclusion of our discussion this evening, the board expresses interest in moving forward in this direction, there will be an item for board action on the January board agenda, and ultimately it would be that board resolution. As far as I see it, no doubt this is a positive for our district. There's not any harm by activating on this list. We are actually leaving, even though our buildings were completed in 2017, because of fiscal closeout, punch list items, and so forth. Punch list has been pretty much completed for a little bit, but the fiscal closeout part just takes time. We would be moving from in progress to an active. Instead, we're going to move in progress to looking at getting on the list for the next segment, which isn't going to come around, we're not going to be at the top of the list immediately. Like I said, we have 90 districts ahead of us. But it does allow us to build for our future. So I'd like to open up to discussion. Any comments or any questions I can try to help you answer?
Any questions for Mr.? Sure. Mr. Clark, questions? Mr. Bagley, Mrs. Gundrum? So the board action would just need to take place in January for us to be put back into the active list, so to speak.
Yes, so the board would approve that board resolution, and then there's an application that will be submitted with it up to OFCC, and upon their approval of our application and board resolution, then we would be put back into that active status. There's no reason to believe that we wouldn't be put back into that active status with those two pieces, the application and board resolution being completed. Very positive thing for us.
Mr. Smith, would like to chime in to
Sure.
this subject?
Yeah, Mr. Penny and Ms. Lane and I have had multiple meetings and also had several with Mr. Thackeray. At this time, I think this is a good move for the district. I think it's no risk. It's simply putting the name of the district back into the pool. Once we do that, in light of everything that's happening with COVID-19, I think we are going to press pause. At that time, once we get our names on the list, so to speak, if we were to proceed, our next step would be to begin, start a process to get community input and involvement, which would be very difficult in the middle of a pandemic as well. But also, one of the next steps, if we were to move forward, would be to have a resolution on an agenda that identified a date for a potential bond issue. And I don't think we're ready for that right now, in light of everything that is happening. So I think the best move for the district at this time is to put our names on the list, press pause, and let's let some time pass, and let's see where we are in late spring, summer, next fall, and evaluate our situation then and do what's right at that time.
I think it's a good idea to be on the list so that if the need does present itself, that we're not having to say, well, now we better get on the list and then wait all these years. So I think it's a good idea, as long as there's no risk. I agree with you. I don't think this is the right time to go after a bond issue. But I definitely think it's a good idea for the district to be proactive and to be prepared to move if that necessity presents itself. So, yeah, I mean, and I'm assuming, Mr. Clemens, you're familiar with this as well, and you don't see any risk to the district?
My understanding is no. Their position has always been if you weren't ready, they just skipped over you.
Skipped over you,
So
right?
I think that's still their policy.
Great. Okay, that's fantastic. There's no other questions?
I did
Sounds
have
like a safe
one.
place to be.
Mr. Shorter?
I did have one question, and this ties into, the amount of matching money, it's not a 50-50 match. But, I'm kind of wondering, if you get your name on the list, and say by some miracle that I'm going to talk about in this legislative report coming up, say if House bill or the fair funding bill somehow pass, and so the district goes from, or all districts go from, not just property tax assessments, but also that income piece. So looking at the income in our district and the amount of economic disadvantaged households, that number has increased. If that were to take place, would that possibly mean that we could possibly get more funding if that bill were to pass? How would that fair funding piece tie into building construction and monies that you?
It wouldn't,
Not at all?
honestly. Well, I shouldn't say not at all. The fair funding plan, the income piece to that is related to the formula, as far as how they calculate the formula for the funding that we receive. That money typically is used for day-to-day operations. It's not typically used for building, construction, the size of construction that we're talking about. This, right now, so the share that we had, which was 26%, I believe, Joe?
That's correct.
Last time, that is our state share from the OFCC.
And that's not
for the next
gonna be-
segment. That won't change. What will change is how much funding they allot for the Facilities Commission, which could be zero some years. So you just never know how much they are going to budget for that, for the Construction Commission. That's always something that, I think with every state budget that comes out, they kind of wait to see what's going to happen with that. And it's, over the years, it's been threatened to be gone from time to time. Status quo kind of where they are now. You just never know with that funding. But that doesn't mean the board couldn't move forward with a bond issue without that OFCC piece in there. But it's hard to pass up 26% of cost if you can get that money.
So there's no overall reassessment of our district's ability to fund.
Not that I know.
I believe that we asked about that, maybe it's been 18 months. It's been a long time, but when we first started sitting down and having meetings, that was one of the first questions that we asked. Because the district continues to change.
Right,
And we
right.
thought, over time, we might be entitled to more than 26%, but we were told that no, that would not change. That would remain the same. So we were disappointed, but that was one of the first questions that we asked, because we were thinking the same thing.
Exactly, and we consistently keep kind of asking that question as time goes on. Recently, that question was asked again, same answer. It'd be great if legislatively something changes. There's been some other changes within the OFCC program, so maybe that would happen in the future, but not at this point.
Okay.
Great question. Anything else, Mr. Bagley, Mrs. Gunner, on that subject? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Penny.
All right, our next topic, consistency pay for substitute teachers, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm really excited to share with you about this idea this evening. As the board is well aware, we've had a substitute shortage for many, many years in our district, as have almost every school in the state of Ohio and around the country, actually. We've done things over the year. The board has done things. You've raised the pay for substitutes almost every year for the last 5 or 6 years. But still, we have many positions that go unfilled every day. Matter of fact, they're so desperate tomorrow that I think Mr. Smith and myself that are going to be subbing along with others, maybe subbing here at the high school. They're going to have me teaching American government. I hope that goes well. Good luck to the students who will be in those 4 classes. But we've tried so many things. Our pay is competitive. Just as a comparison, Lakota, one of the larger districts near us, they pay their substitutes $85 per day. We pay ours $94 per day, and still positions go unfilled. We were fortunate to be able to work into our contract with the union during our negotiations last year, a requirement where we can ask teachers to sub twice a month. That's really helped us this year, but even with that, and many teachers volunteer above and beyond that, but even with that, there are many positions that go unfilled on a daily basis. And even when our teachers go in and sub on their plan, the instructional level really goes down. They're great teachers, but you may have an algebra teacher who's asked to teach an English class, and they haven't prepared for the class. They just go in, pick up the lesson plans, and try to begin to teach. So the instruction isn't at the highest level, although we appreciate all of their efforts so very much. Sometimes when we don't have enough people to sub, we will move teachers like reading teachers into the classroom for the day, or our English learner tutors, our ESL tutors. They are taken away from those students who need their help to go into the classroom, so the students don't get all the interventions that they really desperately need. And when it's desperate enough as well, and we're able to, our principals and assistant principals go into the classrooms to sub, people from the curriculum department, people from district office go and try to sub. And so we're trying to make the best that we possibly can out of it, but it's a difficult situation. We're blessed to have our FCTA president here tonight. Laura Yoder is back there. She's our lone audience member, sitting back there. We meet every Tuesday and talk about different things in the district. And I would say, Laura, almost every Tuesday, we have some conversation about substituting. And she did exactly what you commented on earlier, Mr. Birding, and that is you commented on Kennedy Baker, who not only shared a concern, but also brought an idea. And a few weeks ago, Laura actually came up with an idea, and I thought, well, that's a great idea. I met with the team about it, and I would like to share it with you this evening. The best case scenario would be to get additional substitute teachers, but we're in a pandemic, and people aren't excited about coming into classrooms of students at this time. So the pool has actually gotten so much smaller. So we want to try to incentivize our existing subs so that maybe they would be willing to work additional days. In the month of November, we had 58 different subs in our buildings, in our district. 58, that's not really that many. 58 subs came into our district. Out of those 58, 37 of those subs sub for us 5 days or fewer. So what we want to do is try to get our existing subs, can those people go up to 10 days? Or the people who are at 10, would they be willing to go up to 17 days? And that will help us fill these positions. But we wanted to incentivize them. And so the idea that we came up with is to provide a consistency pay for substitute teachers. Any substitute who will sub half of the days of a month, say there are 20 days in the month, if they're willing to sub for 10 of those days, they would get a consistency pay at the end of the month of $100. If someone is willing to sub 90% of the days, which in that case it would be 18 days if there were 20 days in the month, they would get a consistency pay of $200. It's not something that we've tried before, but I think it's something worth trying because so many of our subs, they not only sub in Fairfield, but they'll sub at surrounding districts as well. And maybe if they thought they were going to get a consistency pay, that they would sub more of their days here in Fairfield so they could reach some of these levels. So that's our plan. And it's not all new money. When our teachers sub in our classrooms, we pay them $32 an hour. So our sub rate is $94 a day, but when we use our internal subs, our teachers that are under the contract, we pay them $192 a day. So if we have more subs at the $94 rate, we can afford to pay them this consistency pay and maybe even save a little money according to how it works out. My best thoughts is that this would cost the district somewhere between $500 and $1,500 a month. It may not cost anything. We don't know. It's according to how it works out. I would like to try this for the months of January and February. I'll look at all the stats, see how many additional positions we were able to get, how much it actually cost us, and if it's working and we're getting more subs through this, I would like to continue it throughout the pandemic. So that's the idea behind the consistency pay. Do you have questions or thoughts about this?
Questions? The question I have is, would there be a minimum? So you said 50% of the school days of a month. Would there be a minimum to get that $100? In other words, if we're in a month like May or June or August,
Right.
or even December, which we had fewer school days, 50%, the 50% number is a lot less than.
Right. It will always be 50% of the student days in the month.
Okay.
And our days range, we're lower in December and November, maybe in May, but even those days, we usually have 14, 15, 16 days. Our highest months are like 22 days in a month. They're the student days, but it would always be 50% and 90%.
Okay.
So we would figure that out for each month and decide who gets the consistency pay.
And snow days would reduce the numbers as well.
Right, it's only student days. Whenever a student is in school, those are the only ones that would count.
Great.
I think it's a great idea. It's a curveball to change things up a little bit, maybe to draw more of those or substitute teachers in, or subs in general. I think it's a good idea. This was this young lady's idea?
It was Laura's
Laura?
idea to do something of this nature, so she came with some ideas for us.
Thank you, Laura. It sounds like you said we may even save money by not using our own
Could.
teachers. So, I mean, that almost seems like a no-brainer.
Right.
Mr. Begley, do you have a comment, Mrs. Gundrum?
Yeah, no, I think it's an excellent idea, and I think you're right. I think there are a lot of subs out there that, for whatever reason, move between districts almost on a weekly basis. And if this would be something that would incentivize them to just sub in Fairfield, then it's a win-win.
Okay. Sounds like we're moving forward with it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Thank you, Ms. Yoder. I also want to add, and I haven't had the opportunity to even share this information with Mr. Martin or any other team members today, just haven't had that opportunity to touch base, but Mr. Martin may be bringing something else to you in the future. I'm not sure if this will occur or not, but I was told this morning in a meeting that our legislator is going to allow local school districts to make some decisions about the criteria to substitute teach in their own individual districts, and that they said that they were putting this on a fast track, that as of right now you have to have a bachelor's degree, but they, in light of the fact that we are in the middle of a pandemic, that the state is going to remove that requirement and then leave it up to the individual school districts. So individual school districts can make that decision. So not saying that we would or would not participate in that. We don't have any information about it whatsoever. But this morning they did share that information with the Butler County Superintendent. So we will be on the lookout for that and pass it along with the board once we receive more information. But again, we don't have any information other than we were told it was coming. So again, not saying that we would or would not, but just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Okay, thank you.
Our last item for board discussion, number 7, is Parade of Lights. And very excited this evening to showcase our trophy. 2020 City of Fairfield Parade of Lights, Fairfield City Schools Champion. And so really excited about winning first place. And earlier this week, had the opportunity to attend a city council meeting where they presented the trophy to Matt Crapo, our Student Services Director. I would like to give a shout out to Mr. Crapo and Mrs. Angie Neal. Those two kind of took this on several months back once we decided to participate. And I also want to give a shout out to our students who performed that evening. They were there all longer than what they expected. But it was a great night, and it was roughly about 2.5 hours of cars driving by and holiday music playing, and so it was just really a great night, not just for us, but for our community. And we're super excited we like to win, so we're excited to win first place. And once again, just want to thank everyone that was involved and showcase our trophy. So.
Nice.
Great. Comments from the board? I wish I could have attended that. I'm very excited. If you'll pass along my thanks to the rest of the judges that were involved with that.
I will. The other two. I did serve as a judge. However, I do feel as though I was able to take my FCSD hat off and remain neutral. But I was not the only judge, I will say that. So we won it fair and square. So
Yeah, I forgot who shared the link to watch it. So whoever did, thank you, because I was able to go on and watch it. And it was great that the city was able to pivot from what they did last year at the inaugural to what we were able to do this year for the pandemic version. And kind of interesting to see like which one had a bigger response. Of course, when we did the parade last year, a lot of times setting up, but the parade was like 5 minutes long, right? So I don't know if more people got to see it because it was mobile or more people got to see it because it was stationary. I'd be interested to find out. I know Mr. Bagley ended up getting into that parade of spectators, and he talked about how long the line was to view it, so I'm sure it was a big hit. But yeah, thank you to Mr. Crapo, and everything that Mrs. Neal touches she's very creative, so everything she does is fantastic. So thank you to those two, and of course, thank you to our students for volunteering their time to come out and add to the event. So congratulations.
thank you. Thank you. All right.